Yeah, there we go. Yeah, we can. Well, let's go ahead and jump in.
All right. So the news out there today is Trump is proposing to end Section 8 housing. That's
Yeah,
earth-shattering.
I mean, is it really considering all the other stuff he's proposed or commented on? I don't know, but
Yeah.
at least it's interesting that this has at least gotten to an executive order, um, or close to that. So,
Yeah, so I
but it,
don't know much background on it. So basically the summary that I was able to pull up and do a little research on is he's not proposing an outright end to Section 8, but he's proposing a dramatic cut and overhaul of the program. So he's talking about slash the federal funding of Section 8 and other rental aid by about 40%, and then shift the responsibility for administering rental assistance from the federal government to the states, giving them back grants and letting them decide how to structure it. Okay, similar to what he did with education.
mhm.
And then this one's kind of interesting. Impose a 2-year cap on assistance for able-bodied adults while prioritizing elderly and disabled recipients. Okay, so he's kind of going after the fraud. That's a common element in abuse. Eliminate federal oversight of the Section 8 as it currently exists, effectively ending the traditional program and leaving it up to states to continue or redesign rental aid.
Mhm.
Okay, so obviously everyone takes a side on this. Are you invested in Section 8 rentals?
I don't have a single Section 8 rental, so I
Yeah, me
mean,
neither.
it's going to sound really crass to say that like I don't really care. This doesn't affect me, but it doesn't really affect me. I mean, if anything, it might create more fear in the investor markets that I'm buying in. So maybe there's more deals that I could jump on, and just convert them into traditional rentals. But I will back up and say that traditionally, the type of properties that I'm renting would qualify for Section 8, and it's a very similar class of tenant, what I call like the working class, blue collar type people who are, typically working. Um, at least in the markets I'm invested in, they're working a lot of manufacturing blue collar type jobs. So those people, in certain circumstances, could qualify for Section 8 and could be potential tenants. But I've always been open to renting to people on Section 8 or some sort of government subsidized housing. It doesn't just have to be Section 8, right? But I've just never had anybody actually try to go through the full process, as far as renting one of my
I've never
apartments.
went down that road because it requires a different set of inspections. And it's just, I've never had a need to reach out beyond who was applying to find
Mm-hmm.
tenants. So I just never wanted to go to the extra length to do it. If it were all things equal, whatever, if they qualified, great, they have the rent. But I had to go through so many extra hoops that I just didn't need to go through the process.
Mm-hmm.
So what this reminds me of is, you're probably not old enough to remember Ronald Reagan, his first term.
No.
He blew up real estate. He bankrupted a lot of businesses. So what he did is during I think it was Tax Reform Act of 1986. Prior to that, people would invest in these commercial real estate because they got a lot of tax shelters, right? So you didn't need cash flow on these properties. You were getting the tax benefit on it. So people were investing in it to save all this money on the taxes. So it wasn't truly cash flowing. So
Mm-hmm.
he went in and he did a tax reform act, and he eliminated many of those tax shelters. Um, and then the passive loss rules he changed, and then he, let's see, I'm kind of reading some notes on this. Reagan also lowered the top individual and capital gains tax rate. So, but basically, I know guys in the business at the time, and I was too young to be in the business, but they said they lost millions during this tax change, and it came out of nowhere, right? Reagan came in, changed the rules, the whole game shifted, and they were stuck because they were playing by the old set of rules. So this potentially, if someone's totally invested in Section 8, I mean, this could blow up their whole investment strategy model. And
Yeah,
you
and
could
I
see a lot of these investors that were buying into, some of these, is it Millennial Mike? What is he do? Gary Indiana?
mhm.
Like his whole portfolio is Section 8, isn't it?
I think it's probably predominantly Section 8. I mean, there are certainly lots of people who is majority Section 8, if not 100% Section 8.
Right.
There's a guy I see his content on YouTube, Instagram, whatever, and his claim to fame is like, hey, I bought a Section 8 rental in the middle of nowhere and put $10,000 down and scaled to 150 units or whatever. But he's got all Section 8, and so what I feel like would realistically happen is Trump, you know, takes the Section 8 program, cuts it down a good bit, like what he's proposing, and gives the power back to states.
Yep.
But really, there's going to be a lagging, you know, it, not a lagging indicator, but there's going to be a lag in time for them to actually implement that. And so I think, month to month, um, they're going to have a 3 or 6 months of runway, most likely, maybe even a year to actually roll over oversight from the federal government to the state or local levels. And so I think in that amount of time, people could probably figure it out. It's probably not that big of a hiccup, all things considered. But
Yeah, maybe.
it's still just a risk.
2026 is going to come by fast. You can put that property on the market now, and are you going to sell it in time?
Yeah, I don't know.
Now, most states probably aren't going to just outright cut Section 8, right? Because, I mean, even if you had like a super financially responsible state and you were going to, take that money and you're not going to cut it because it's going to be a shock to the system and create other problems. So, most states are probably going to keep the core of that in there so they don't have a bunch of homeless, right?
It'll probably end up being just more oversight, as far as like, hey, who's actually on our program? What standards did they have to qualify for this? What's the, exit strategy for them? Is it just keeping them in our program indefinitely? Is it trying to transition them to another program? So I feel like something like that is going to pop up, most likely out of this.
Yeah, and then that 2-year cap on assistance for able-bodied adults. That's interesting. You know,
Yeah, I don't really know how I feel about that because I do know some people that are on, assistance that, certainly need it. And then I'm sure there's got to be a lot of people that are on assistance that probably don't really need it and are simply taking advantage of the system. But it's like, how are you really going to weed that out? Is that the best way to do it? I, I don't know.
yeah, it's ultimately going to be some bureaucrat that's going to be making the judgment call, right?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right.
So that could change your investment strategy. So I thought that was newsworthy and say, oh, put this on our radar.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see people's business models that are solely built on federal credits. Whether that's money coming in, tax dollars, tax credits. There's a couple developers near me, and they do a lot of that. So they will go build a whole apartment complex, solely for the advantage of getting tax credits and some physical dollars coming in, similar to Section 8 programs. So it's like if they invest, $10 million in cash or bank financing, they can get $2.5 million in tax credits plus, their whole thing is, their whole entire rent roll is subsidized. So people
That sounds
build
like
massive.
Section 42,
I honestly, I
low
wish I
income
knew.
housing tax credit.
Yeah, well, it merges because this is in South Carolina, so it merges the low income housing tax credit with another program, and
Okay.
I'm blanking on the name. So it kind of takes the best of both and it's able to mash
Right.
that together. So you kind of get both of those,
Yeah,
play
Section
the role.
42 also has, and I don't know if Josh, it looks like he's a CPA, he might be able to answer this. There's a portion of it that you can use for restoring old buildings, and that you can use tax credits for rehabbing old properties. And I'm not sure the criteria on that. I have worked on Section 42 low income housing tax credits. I was chasing sites around the country for a developer uh, doing Section 42 developments, and they would make proposals to the local HRAs, the county who was ever administering those funds in that area. and I had to go out and acquire the sites, find potential sites, find the seller, line it up, and then go through the whole bidding process. It was a lot of work for little return.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I feel like a lot of those make sense if you're going to be doing that same business model over a 20, 40 year period. Like you really got to have a very long time horizon because you don't typically reap the benefits until years down the road on some of
yeah,
those.
yeah, it cash flows right away. So they're going to make money off the cash flow. And then I forget the timeline, but I think it's like 15 years or something. Then you're off the Section 42. You don't have to keep that as affordable housing at that point. You can go market rate.
Yeah, I actually looked and I made an offer on a 4 unit in my market. This was maybe a year and a half ago, and it had a very similar sort of thing. It was being sold as a portfolio with another 150 units that were all from this one development group that had done a bunch of stuff like that, and they had a 20 or 25 year time frame to roll out of whatever federal funding program they got money from. And they were coming up on like year 22 or 23, so they weren't quite out of it.
Okay.
And so essentially, it came down to they didn't even realize they couldn't sell their own property. Like they were essentially forced to hold it until the end of the program ran out.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it again, it's certainly a strategy, but not one that I uh, currently employ.
All right. So, other news this week. Let's see. Logan Motoshami showing that we've got positive year-over-year growth in purchase applications for the last 13 weeks. Um, and let's see. Pulte is talking about rates are coming down. We're about 6.5% locally. I think 6.75 is at national average. So rates are heading the
Yeah,
right direction.
they are. Do you think it will stay that way, especially as we get closer to the 90-day mark for tariffs?
I am not afraid of tariffs. So, and I don't know, maybe it's blinding optimism and denial, but I see these other countries as protesting. They're an Amazon seller and they're protesting Amazon. Well, good luck, right? We're the biggest marketplace for you. I know China sells globally, but we're a big enough market that they can't ignore this. So there's going to be a settlement reached. We are seeing local orders pick up. I've seen some news where some local manufacturers are picking up huge increases in local orders. Will there be a little bit of chaos in the meantime? Sure. I'm not getting worried. We'll see what happens. But I think there's a bigger strategy at play here. Ken McElroy did a little episode on this one. Is we have a huge portion of our debt that has to be refinanced, and we're going from those financed on a short term, like 2% or something crazy low rate. That's all coming due. That all has to be refinanced, and we don't want to refinance it at 7% because that's just going to kill our budget.
Hmm.
So he's got two strategies to do it. If you had a high credit card, you got two things you got to do. You got to get down the balance the best you can, or increase your revenue and increase or decrease the interest rate, um, just to manage that going forward. So I think that's kind of part of the why he's trying to push that. I don't know if he's going to get what he wants, even though he demands it. But I think that that's in play. We'll see what happens. And then I kind of talked about, well, we can get into that later. That was the my local lender that had a cool program right now for rates, but I'm not worried about the tariffs. I just I kind of subscribe to Logan Motoshami's opinion. If he wanted tariffs, he would put tariffs in and there'd be no negotiations.
Hmm.
But it's that negotiation strategy and it's going to work itself out. So.
Hmm. Yeah, no, I'm kind of subscribing to the same idea as you. I mean, I really think that if he wanted tariff revenue, we certainly would have got it. I feel like it's more about uh, balancing, and I kind of put that in very loose quotations, balancing out, the trade, across some of our more strategic partners. One of the things, and I think Zuber might have mentioned this a couple weeks back, or maybe this is on another podcast, but I was listening yesterday talking about the value of the dollar dropping and how some of these other countries are holding our treasury T-bills. I
Hmm.
think I'm saying that right. And how that could impact things one way or the other. He mentioned countries like South Africa and I think India and Russia are trying to come together to form a potential new currency that would essentially be backed by some of these other major countries used particularly to trade with. So it's kind of
Similar to what
moving.
BRICS was doing, right?
Yeah, very similar, but it was more African and Asian countries. I think maybe even Brazil was in it. I might have those countries wrong, but I do remember
Yeah.
South Africa as well. So kind of an interesting thing. So I wonder if Trump, seeing some of these things play out on a global scale, if he's trying to utilize the tariff conversation to really get strong partnerships with Canada and Mexico, and maybe we create our own little pact, similar to NAFTA, but something different.
Could be. It's kind of the macro stuff. It's interesting to watch, but I'm not an expert in it.
I I am by no means an expert either. I hear little tidbits, and some of it makes sense, and it takes me a while to piece it together.
Mhm. And then Howard Hanna, you're familiar with that brokerage?
Yeah, so they're primarily in the Midwest, so they're probably up in your market, aren't
Yeah. They're the largest private, well, they're not in my market, but they're the largest privately owned brokerage in the country.
they?
And the latest is with the NAR and the whole lawsuit settlement and how they got held holding the bag, right? The insurance they
Oh
had
yeah.
through NAR didn't cover them, so they had to pay out of pocket. So the larger brokers had to pay out of pocket. And then with the clear cooperation and NAR not doing anything about it, they're talking about pulling out of NAR and the MLS
Hmm.
and then just going because they have a large enough market share in their markets that they would just be their own. It'd become like a commercial real estate. The MLS would just cease to exist. Zillow would go away because it doesn't get the
Yeah.
data. That's why Zillow is adamant that if you don't uh, go on IDX right away with the listing, they won't publish it. Because with that clear cooperation going away, Zillow's
Hmm.
not going to get their feed. And if Zillow doesn't get their feed, they're no longer a viable site.
Yeah. It it is certainly an interesting predicament. I mean, I'm sure you probably have some thoughts or feelings on it, but a brokerage like Howard Hanna, it's like if you have a population of 1 million buyers across multiple states and markets, how are you
Mhm.
going to get all those million buyers to move away from Zillow and other markets, to come look at
Why
your
do they go to
website?
Zillow? Why do the consumers go to Zillow?
I feel like it's one of the top three platforms that most
Why
people do.
is it? Why is it?
Convenience.
No, why is it?
Well, it's because that's where the listings
Because
are.
they have Howard Hanna's data on there. And Howard Hanna gives them their data for free. And then Zillow sells the leads back to Howard Hanna.
Hmm. I'm just kind of curious as to how it's going to play out with Howard Hanna moving their buyers or the potential buyers who are on Zillow looking at the Howard Hanna listings. How do they move those buyers off of the Zillow app onto their app or website to go specifically look at their listings as opposed to every other brokerage putting it on Zillow? Because for me, like I buy out of state, right? So if I go look up in Ohio, how am I going to know that this one property that I really would like is on another broker's website that is not somehow interconnected with all the other ones to show and populate all the listings? I mean,
You're going to
maybe,
learn or you're going to starve.
probably so. But I think it's going to be an interesting social experiment to see how brokerages can go rewire people's brains to not try to go to a one-stop shop, and now they're looking at
There's
20
no
different websites.
rewiring. It's simple survival. It's like if you're feeding the deer and you move the feed pile to the back of the house instead of the front of the house, it's not going to take long for the deer to find that new pile. You know,
Yeah.
the consumer is going to go where they can find the data, and the larger brokers control the data. So Zillow doesn't really offer a whole lot to these brokers. You get rid of the MLS, which they did in the lawsuit, right? There's no reason for the MLS to exist now because that contract to pay the other agent is gone. That got wiped out
Right.
in the lawsuit. So there's no reason for an MLS. And then once the MLS goes away, there's no reason Realtor.com, Zillow, any of these IDX sites get any of the data. The
Hmm.
data is owned by the agents and the broker.
Yeah. I just wonder how consumer, again, I'm just trying to play devil's advocate a little bit. Like,
Hmm.
if I'm a consumer, how am I going to know which 20 different brokers to go look for the listings? Like, am I just going to have all these different websites
Just like
saved and
commercial real
logins?
estate. You want to go find an office building for sale? How do you go find that now?
CoStar. So,
But you don't have all
um,
the data on CoStar.
well, sure. You don't,
You
but
only
at least
have what
it's a
the
good starting
brokers
place.
want to advertise. CoStar is
Right.
just LoopNet is just advertise platform. So the brokers are going to hold their listing inventory. If you're serious about buying an investment property, you're going to have to call CB Richard Ellis. You're going to have to call Colliers. You're going to have to call these brokers because they all
Hmm.
have their own data. They don't, their MLS does not share brokerage payments. It's all negotiated. So there's no
Right.
reason to share that anymore because that contract's broken.
Right. Yeah, no, and I totally hear you, and I do agree. I just think it's going to be fascinating to figure out, how consumers know and understand that there's, Coldwell Banker, there's Remax, there's Keller Williams, there's EXP, there's Howard, there's, not even to mention the small boutique brokerages,
Yep.
that are going to have stuff. It's like now we're just going to have to know every agent in town, you know, if we're
Hmm.
if we're a buyer trying to find the best deal.
Yep. But that's how that's the new business model now. That's how brokerages are going to have to survive.
Yeah. It's going to be wild. I
Yeah.
I
I
think
don't
there's
agree
going to
with it. I
be
mean, I think the old system was working very well. It should go back to the old system, but we
mm.
can't. That's been busted.
I did see a AI meme that was spoofing Compass's Twitter account, and it basically they put out a tweet that said, "Hey, we're going back to the old way. We're going to be putting our listings back in the book again."
See, I predate the MLS or the online, the internet. I was in the business when we just went from the books to dial-up service to access the listings.
Mm.
And we had one picture for the house, and everything was in code. It was two or three letter abbreviations,
Yeah,
and that was a
my
very efficient system.
So I trained under another agent when I first got into the business. He'd been in about 15 years. His mother-in-law was also an agent. She'd been in there for like 45, 50 years. So I really kind of sat with her most of the time and learned a ton. But she would show me all of the old books and everything. So
Yeah.
even though I didn't use it, I did get to see it. And it's certainly a very unique and cool system.
Yeah. So, I mean, what we learned was Zillow hasn't been around that long. Real estate's been sold a long time before the internet.
Hmm.
Internet's just a communication tool. The platforms change. AOL was the big thing at one time. That's gone. Zillow
Hmm.
can go by the wayside. The bottom line is who's getting the business, who's got the inventory, and that's where the consumers are going to flock to.
Yeah.
They're looking for a house, they're going to go where they can find a house.
Yeah, which I totally I totally agree. You got to go where the inventory is. I'm just kind of curious as to how that's going to play out because like EXP, for example, they don't have like a mobile app, whereas KW was trying to build and push that for years, and most brokerages don't have their own app. I, so it's like, is everyone going to go back from an app to a website? And you know, I don't know. I'm excited to
Apps are
see.
pretty easy to build. You can have AI build one out in 5 minutes.
Yeah, I'm starting to learn more about app. I had somebody turn me on to a new CRM. You've probably heard of it, Craig, but it's a Go High Level or just High Level.
I've heard of it. I haven't worked with that one.
I've just kind of started, but it's crazy the amount of AI that's built into all of these now. I mean, the software built me a website in like 10 minutes.
Hmm.
Like it's just like crazy.
It is. I thought WordPress was a huge leap forward, because you could sit there and actually do it without knowing HTML.
Hmm.
Now AI builds that whole thing out in a couple minutes.
Yeah. Where do you feel like this is going to end up? Like, do you think it's going to be a matter of who can get the most eyeballs on their website, app, product, listings, whatever? And do you think the end game for agents needs to be how do we attract eyeballs, or what do you feel like is the end game for agents? How can we be
There's a
our
lot
best self?
that lots that's going to happen, but ultimately, as an agent, inventory is a game. Listing agent, right? To be the buyer's agent, it's just not conducive anymore. So it's you got to focus in on listings. You got to have the inventory. You control the inventory. The buyers will be drawn to you. Um, and ultimately that's where it's going to go. The eyes are going to follow that data, and that'll follow it to, in some markets to certain brokers. In other markets, they may play a little more fairly than other markets. So you may still see a lot of cooperation going on. The broker I'm with is going to be very cooperative, playing fair. Compass is trying to hold everything in-house, and try to sell it within their office. So I think you're
Hmm.
going to see a lot of brokers doing that. Ultimately, I think what it's going to happen is when the market's hot, they can succeed by holding it in-house, kind of like Lennar does and these national home builders. They stop paying the agents, they cut out the agents when the market's hot, and they sell everything direct to the consumer. And then suddenly, when the market's bad, they come on and I'm your best friend now, right? I'm going to pay you the commissions. And then no one likes them. So ultimately, in this business, brokers need to cooperate to survive. So I think long term, it's going to work its way back to the old system, but I think it's going to be some pretty ugly stuff in the meantime. Um, so this settlement does not last forever. This expires, what, 5 years, 3 years, and it goes back to the old system.
Yep.
If it goes back to the old system,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do agree with you. It's certainly going to go toward more the route of commercial real estate, where it's, this person, has a listing of, a sign in front of the property and they're the one getting all the calls on it. You know, like I have two commercial listings right now, and most of the traffic, broker wise, is coming from brokers driving by the property and saying, "Oh, hey, I have a client who's like that."
Yep.
Some are calling from online, but most are,
And they
driving physically
negotiate the
by the
commission
property.
before getting because they're going to get hosed if they don't. Yep.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the model that we're under now. It's just everyone, no, most residential agents don't understand that. They think it's still the old system, and most consumers think it's the old system. Working with first-time home buyers, they're like, I have to sign this. It's like, yeah, sorry. I mean, you had to sign agency and disclosure too, but normally first meeting, I wouldn't have you sign this long contract.
Yeah.
Um,
It is really interesting because I feel like a lot of my business is dominated by listings comparatively. Like it's probably 60% listings, maybe 65% listings. And out of a lot of my listings over the last maybe 6 months, I probably noticed it more. I have less and less agents calling or texting me to ask, "Hey, what's the commission on this? What's the seller offering?" They're just saying, "Hey, can I show it? Is it available?"
mhm.
So I have no idea if that means their buyers have agreed to pay them and they're just understating it, or they're just showing it anyway and saying, "Hey, I'll negotiate it after the fact."
Yeah, I think most of us have learned how to have that conversation now, and the buyers know if the seller's not paying the commission, we'll find out before we make an offer, but we don't need to go through all the headache right out of the gate.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, before you make the offer, you're going to need to know. But the buyers
Yeah,
know they could be on the hook.
yeah. I did actually have a agent reach out. I think this was maybe like a month ago. One of my listings, the seller was offering 2%. But I always tell people, hey, this is what my seller's offering. Bring us an offer. Let's actually negotiate this. Like
Mhm.
like real professionals. Um, and obviously, I said that in a very nice professional manner.
Well,
But
you do that anyhow. Just bring us an offer, right?
right, right.
You got to start somewhere.
Yeah, but it was crazy. The agent, she got back to me. She's like, "Oh, okay. Well, I'm just not going to show it.
Mhm.
You're not offering enough." I was floored. That's the first time I've ever actually heard that like, directly to say, "Hey, your seller isn't offering enough, so I'm not going to waste my time."
It's a new world for a lot of these agents, right? It's they're not quite grasping the negotiation part of it. I don't think it's an efficient way to move real estate. I really think it's a bad system, right?
Yeah,
It's a shame that's the way it went. But a jury of renters and not owners who've never purchased a house decided that's the way it should be. There wasn't one single homeowner on that jury.
yeah, yeah. There's a lot of things about the whole process that I'm just not a fan of how it got implemented, what actually happened. So you
Mhm.
know,
I mean, it is what it is.
I'll
And
yeah,
people are going to buy and
it
sell
is
real
what it
estate.
is.
It's going to happen. It's just less efficient. It's going to be more cumbersome and more expensive for consumers.
Mhm.
Thank
Absolutely.
the lawyers.
Well, hey, as investors, if we take our agent hat off, put our investor hat on, in
Mhm.
certain ways, it does benefit us.
We have the
There
ability to
is
prospect and find deals.
right. If there is a property out there, we know how to negotiate it better. There's
Mhm.
potentially less eyeballs on it because of the way it's marketed. Um, I mean, I even see stuff now where I'm like, yeah, that agent who listed it clearly has no idea what they're doing. Like, there was an agent who listed a piece of land. This was like 25 acres, and I looked for stuff for some of my developer clients, and there was not a single picture on the MLS, very little description, just the parcel ID and a price. No for sale sign. Just you know, I'm like, okay, well, you also even mispriced the property, like you way underpriced it compared to market. No wonder it sat for a year with no activity.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway,
You don't see that often where underpricing doesn't sell, but I ran into that once. We took over a listing of townhomes, and it was a bunch of rental townhomes in a great area, and they weren't selling. They weren't selling. Took over the listing, raised the prices, and then suddenly they started selling.
fascinating.
Yeah, it's like, wow.
Hmm. Do you think for that it was just the price point that they were in? Like, was it like a 150 price point, and so therefore everybody thinks it's a you know a
Yeah, this
flip
was
type?
kind of that later 90s. So like 97, probably 99. I think it was 99. So right around the 2000 mark. And it was, we hadn't got into it was starting to get into the full frenzy of the real estate bubble, but not quite there yet. So some of it was market timing. The other was product position where it wasn't getting picked up in the searches for the market that was looking for that area. When they saw something that cheap, they were afraid of it.
Hmm. Fascinating.
Hmm.
I I do feel like you can see that with certain residential properties. It's like if I go see a house in a certain neighborhood and it's priced below 200,000, I know that's basically a total gut, flip.
You assume. Not
Well, right,
always.
right. You
Yeah.
would assume, so that would be my fault as the agent for not doing the proper due diligence on it.
Yeah. That's where pictures help out. And the pictures weren't in full effect yet because the internet really hadn't come about. You know, I think we
Mhm.
were, well, there may have been early stages of MLS on the internet, but we're probably still dial-up service at that point.
Yeah. Hmm.
So it keeps
Crazy.
changing. It's fun to watch.
Yeah, it's always a fun
Well,
market.
maybe these topics weren't good because we lost two people on here. So
Yeah, we did. But hey, that's okay. You and I are here to talk and hopefully provide value, and
yeah,
that's what we'll do. But I do know you shared two other X. I still call it Twitter.
I do
Twitter
too.
links with me.
Twitter's
One
easier
was
to say than X.
oh, it is, yeah. If you just type in X somewhere, people think it's a typo. At
Yeah.
least my phone still thinks it's a typo.
Well, I covered the Logan Motoshami and
Yeah.
the debt. And then we covered, oh yeah, so it's 7 trillion in debt that has to be refinanced. Just a
Yeah,
skosh.
that's crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just really interesting to look at our interest payments on the debt and just trying to understand how the bond market works. Because to be honest with you, I haven't really dove into the bond market too much. I've always just kind of shied away from most of that.
we're real
Claim
estate
me.
guys. We're not finance guys.
Yeah, exactly. Like
The
I,
finance guys
I
speak
know
a
real
different
estate.
language.
They do, they do. So hard for me to turn off my real estate brain and understand it.
I'm trying to
Yeah, but
find my note tab. So we have a new loan program in the office. That was the other one that we were going to discuss.
oh yeah, yeah, that was it.
Okay, so it's not a Fannie or Freddie product. So this one's kind of exciting to me. So you have someone with a lot of assets but no real income, right? So realtors, investors, right? We write down all our income next to nothing, and then we may have a portfolio of real estate or stock market or whatever it is. So the net worth might look good. So we might be rich in assets and poor in income, like a farmer. So what they'll do is they'll take the assets to qualify, and this is a private lender that's in-house, and they'll take the assets. So let me grab a calculator here. So let's just say you had 500,000 in assets, and they'll use, I think the ratio was 84 months. So you take 500,000 divided by 84. That's like $5,950 a month in additional income, how they calculate it. You don't have
Hmm,
to sell it. They're not going to lien it. You're not going to lose the interest on it, but they're going to look at it and say, yeah, you have the ability to pay that if you had to. So then if like, income to debt ratio it has to be under 50%, but if you write down all your income, you may have like 75%, right? Above 50%
right.
debt ratio. So this would be allow you to use that as additional income for you to qualify for that loan.
Hmm.
And you're going to need 20% down to get a decent rate. They do have a lower rate. I didn't even look at that. Um, and it'll be 30-year fixed rate, but it'll be about a quarter point higher than say a
That's,
Fannie product.
but I mean, really, that's not bad. I
No,
mean, you're talking about a quarter point higher for something that effectively gets you financing on something that you wouldn't qualify with a traditional lender.
right.
Hmm.
So this works great for business owners, you know. Um, their business may be the net worth may be a pretty high value. Or like a younger couple, they got may have some good jobs and stuff, but they've leveraged up on some stuff, but they got a net worth where they're tucking a lot of money away. Student debt might kill them, that kind of stuff. And they're too young to tap into that equity, the investment funds. Because you gotta be what, 65, I think it is, or 60 to tap into
Hmm.
that. This you don't tap into it. They just use that as possibility. You could sell it.
Hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. So does this lender, do they lend in multiple states, or is this just in Minnesota?
Um, I will check that out. Let me get back to you on that one. It's actually my broker's lender, and they
Oh,
partnered
okay.
with another bank. And this is a new bank. So I'll find out what viability they have. If they're doing it, other banks are doing it.
Yeah, it's certainly a really interesting product. I haven't heard of that one before, at least in that kind of flair or variant of it.
Yeah. I think there's enough private equity out there where there's people are getting into the business. So I think there's a lot more opportunity for financing. Back in the day, everything we did was FHA or VA, and then conventional was, you could do conventional, but you didn't run into a lot of it. Now I
Hmm.
hardly see FHA. It's all conventional.
Yeah, I mean, if you have the debt to income, why would you even want to do FHA? It's like you automatically want to do conventional because you put three, normally 5%, at a minimum, but you could in certain circumstances do 3% down. Okay?
Yeah.
Basically
And
it's
then
like
the
that
mortgage
lately.
insurance now on FHA lasts forever. It didn't always
Hmm.
be that way. You used to be able to get rid of that when you hit the 20% equity.
Hmm. So I guess that probably changed in '08,
Yeah.
I assume.
Dodd-Frank. People think Dodd-Frank was one rule. No, it was a panel of administrators or whatever. And I actually had an RSS feed on my website, and there'd be like 5 or 6 rules a day. Banks couldn't keep up. That's why banks shut down lending because the rules kept changing on a regular basis. It's just you could do an RSS feed to keep this stream coming of all these new rules that were coming out of this
Hmm.
Dodd-Frank. It was a panel that was just creating rules. So once that settled down, then banks figured out what the rules were, and then they could start lending again. And that was about 2013. And
Hmm.
then the market started to pick up around 14, 15.
You know, I wonder if those rules were actually beneficial for the market or beneficial for consumers, really, in the long run.
Some
Because
were, some needed to happen, but it was kind of like going after that fly with a shotgun.
I've seen a lot of properties since like 21, 20 maybe, kind of coming out of that COVID era that were bought and sold sub two, because a lot of people were in distress, and so
Sub
I see that.
two.
Correct.
Yikes.
Yeah. So, somebody has a FHA loan on their house and they're maybe 1 month behind. They're about to get 2 or 3 months behind, and they would rather sell their house, but they don't have a ton of equity because they bought it a year ago, but it's a low-ish rate, comparatively. Maybe it's 4.5%, and you could rent it out and make 200-300 bucks a month of cash flow. But the person who's living there and behind on their payment, they don't, they're not a landlord. So I've seen a lot of those get sold, and I still see them all the time, just in these Facebook groups and different people,
Yeah,
who
I'm
are
scared of the
eating their
sub
way out.
two. To
Yeah,
me,
it.
that's a rule change. Well, there's already a rule against it. The bank already said, we can call this loan due, right? There's a due on sale clause. And then the argument is, well, they're not enforcing it. Correct. They're not
Well,
enforcing it today.
right. They
They can
could change their
enforce it at
mind.
any time they want,
Yeah.
you know. So as soon as they start taking losses on this, they're going to call them all due.
Hmm. Yeah, I saw something on Twitter last week. Or maybe it was this week. Let me see if I can go back. So Melody Wright, yeah, she put out something on the second. She was at some sort of conference and found out that one of the loan servicers who services seller wrap deals was at 17% delinquent on their loans. And these
Seller
aren't.
wrap deals, does that include subject to, or is that a contract for deed and then the seller is making the payments to the bank?
Yeah, I believe it's contract for deed. She clarified to say it was not subject to, um,
Okay.
but that doesn't necessarily mean there's no debt underneath. But still, it's very fascinating. Like
Yeah.
17%. I mean, that's pretty high. And this is a national servicer. So
Right. Those wraps were made illegal during the 80s because there were a lot of people when the rates were high, they were selling on contract for deed. And then the first owner would then be responsible to make the payment on the loan, the existing loan. And then that next person had a contract for deed and might sell that to another person on a contract for deed. So that payment was made to this CD holder. Then that went to the original owner that paid the mortgage, or that owner or that first CD holder was paying the mortgage. And then maybe it might do it again. And then somewhere along the chain, someone stopped paying the mortgage. That's why
yeah.
these rules were in place, is because so many people lost their ass, especially the banks.
Hmm.
And we're repeating a lot of those same mistakes because people are chasing that low rate.
Yeah, we certainly are, and I'm seeing a lot of that. So it's just really fascinating to see some of this anecdotal data and try to figure out how does that line up with with my strategy or what I'm trying to accomplish. So I certainly would want to argue for seller finance and against subject to. So try to find somebody with a low loan amount on their
Mhm.
property, or they own it free and clear and they can just finance it to you. Those are the people you want to work with, not people who have little to no equity and you're just trying to make $150 off of their payment.
If they're going to go into default no matter what, then maybe they take the chance, right, as a seller.
Maybe so. Um, I mean, I know many people who have bought stuff like that. I think there's just more inherent risks with a subject to type transaction than there are with other ones, and it
Mhm.
can get real costly. So that's why I like to see stuff that has low or has a good amount of equity. Not that's like, oh, I got like $10,000 in equity. It's like, well, if I have to fire sell that, I'm underwater a lot of money.
I had a subject to deal in my hands, right? It was the sellers had an FHA mortgage, like 3% interest rate, very like no equity, right? And they kind of had to sell, right? They sold it, and or it was going to be assumed, so we had a buyer in place to assume it, and it took, God, what was it, 9 months for FHA to come back with an answer on whether or not
Hmm.
they're going to assume it. And
Nine
then,
months.
yep. So in the meantime, the seller got into trouble financially and they filed bankruptcy.
Hmm.
So then FHA says, well, now you can't sell it. You can't assume this loan because there was a bankruptcy on this. Now you have to hang on to it for 3 years before you can have it assumed. So at that point, I'm just like, well, I can make the payments for you and manage it. And or you just keep it, which I would recommend. I'll manage it for you and just wait the 3 years. Maybe you'll pick up some appreciation in the meantime, pay down some of the loan. So that's what we did.
Hmm.
But there's absolutely zero point in getting an FHA mortgage because they're not set up to have those assumable. None of the banks know how to do it.
Yeah,
So
they don't. They really don't. It's way easier to just get your own FHA mortgage, or just try to, buy it at the debt amount and just get a conventional on it.
yeah.
It's the easier way to do it. I have heard of people, and I haven't done this, but I have heard of people using lease options instead of doing the whole sub two transaction because the lease option doesn't transfer title, but it's still,
Correct.
you
That's a
know,
cleaner way to do it. Yep.
it's a little cleaner. But again, I haven't done it, so I don't really know. It
Mhm.
still seems like there's some potential risk and headaches there, regardless.
Yeah.
But
You know the old Murphy's Law of Real Estate. Do you ever see that poster?
mm,
There's like whatever 12 commandments of real estate, Murphy's real estate laws. And like one of them is creative financing leads to creative litigation.
well, he's not wrong.
Yeah.
He's not wrong. Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting time. I'm optimistic. I think we're gonna see things rock, but I know people are scared out there. The doomers are pounding the drum, right? The market's coming in, the sky's falling. Melody Wright's kind of leading the charge. Here comes the foreclosure wave. The percentage that's in foreclosure, yeah, you're going to have some defaults. People are stressed with the inflation. Um, some markets are going to be hit hard, like the southern states. But those were very bubbly at the time, right? It was the pandemic. In fact, I think I have a video on that, right? So you had all these southern cities that boomed during the pandemic. Everybody went to, didn't have to go to the office, so they could work from home. So they went down and whatever, started working from home in these southern states, right? Vacation areas. And then
Hmm.
suddenly companies are calling them back to work. Okay, so that
Yeah,
supply demand ratio
gets
is,
out of balance.
yep. So they caught the supply up to the demand during the COVID, and then suddenly that demand retracts quickly, and then suddenly they're oversupplied. You know, the Northeast, Midwest, they're sitting just fine. You know, Our inventory is still short. Our days on market have picked up a little bit, but our prices are still increasing. How's your
Hmm.
area doing?
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, I don't want to say it's maybe plateaued as far as appreciation, but we had a pretty hefty run up. I mean, gosh, probably almost 20% for one, if not maybe 2 years in a row.
Mhm.
Um, so it's like you're talking about
But
taking the
still not
median.
as crazy as the southern, like Florida and Austin, and that
No,
crazy.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
no, no, no. Um, so we took our median price point from I think it was 230 or 240 up to I think we're sitting at 360 right now. I might be a little off on that, but that's
Yeah.
about where it is. So you're taking the median price point up 130,000, give or
Yep.
take, um, and that all happened in about 3 years.
Yep.
So it's a
Amazing.
you know yeah, pretty crazy growth. And you also have to understand part of that, at least for our market, was really based on the supply and demand because you had so many people moving to the Carolinas from California, from Texas. People, and I know a lot of people are going into Texas, but there's a lot of people moving out of Texas, people moving from, the Northeast down to the South because they wanted to get away, whether that's politically or, whatever, coming out of
Yep.
some of the COVID stuff. So a lot of what we have and still have today is a lot of supply imbalance where you still have a lot of demand and the supply is getting better. The demand's dropping off and more supply is coming on. So it's starting to balance out some. But um,
Your region also added a lot of power plants, and same with Texas. So you're getting a lot of these data centers because you have the plentiful, cheap
yeah,
power. So you're
yep.
getting the jobs. You're experiencing real growth there, not a
Hmm.
simulated COVID growth.
Right. Yeah. So BMW has one of the larger manufacturing plants in North America is in Greenville. Technically, it's in Spartanburg County, but it's right beside the airport. And in South Carolina, there's two ports that ship stuff in. So there's the port that's in Charleston. They take all the cargo containers off of the ships, they put it on trains, and then they they take the cargo up to Greer, where there's an inland port. And so the inland port, BMW, and the airport are all right beside each other. So
Okay.
there's a lot of industry that comes from that. And so anyway, BMW is building something like 1 million square foot battery plant in Woodruff, which is about 45 minutes south of Spartanburg and Greenville.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of demand coming in from that. There's other manufacturing. I mean, last 5 years, we probably had 15 or 20 spec warehouses go up, like anywhere from 100,000 to 1 million square feet. Like
Mhm.
you're talking about adding like 4 to 5 million square feet in a matter of a couple of years to our
Okay.
supply, and it's all getting absorbed. So
And then
it's a lot
what
of jobs.
follows then? Jobs. What follows
Yep,
jobs?
growth, people.
Yeah, housing.
Yep. So it's kind of interesting because right now you don't have the people necessarily following the jobs yet because the jobs aren't quite there. They're getting
They're
there.
coming. Yep.
But I think over the next 3 to 4 years, we're going to see another big spike in demand in Greenville. House prices will go with that. But
Yep.
right now, it's kind of like everyone's sitting tight. So there's very low appreciation. It's not zero, but it's pretty close to it comparatively.
Yeah, growth never runs at a straight chart, right? It's, oversupply and then a little bit dip and but the trajectory is going up.
Hmm.
You know, you've seen that map where success isn't a straight line. You go off a cliff and then you go,
Right.
I
Yeah.
mean that's what growth is. It's just you're heading the right direction. You're attracting the jobs. You have the resources, the cheap energy. The factories are moving in. The jobs aren't quite there yet, but they're coming. Once the jobs are there, then you need the service industry to provide groceries, food, entertainment, all that stuff to the workers for that factory. And then
Hmm.
all those people also need housing, and then the economy just starts snowballing from there. And that's kind of Ken
Hmm.
McElroy's strategy too. Is you got to go where the people are.
Yeah.
So the people are moving to that industry area.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm very bullish on the upstate South Carolina area long term. I mean, I don't think you can buy a bad property if you hold on to it.
Yeah.
There's certain pockets of Spartanburg that I'm really kind of bullish on. That it has a very low price point. I mean, you're talking about 150,000, 175,000 is the average price point. And normally if that were in Greenville, you'd be looking at 250, 300. So it's really just purely based on location. But Spartanburg County has all of the jobs and all of the manufacturing, most of the tax revenue comparatively. Like Greenville County has a lot, but it's not as much as Spartanburg. Um, but there's certainly a lot of manufacturing. In fact, Amazon just bought 100 acres in Fountain Inn, which is a little south of Greenville, for 16.5 million, and they're building 180 million or 200 million dollar plant. Well, I guess it's more of a
Do you think
redistribution
Amazon's going to
facility.
disappear from these tariffs?
No,
Yeah.
no, yeah, they certainly need space. That's for sure. So,
But it's fun to get worked up about it.
oh, it is, yeah. I mean, hey, in the long run, it just means more growth, more jobs, more neighborhoods, more houses to sell. And if somebody like me who's I've been in it for about 7 years now, I can continue to build my name and my reputation now, so that hopefully by the time those people get there, it's like, oh, hey, here's a great agent who's been in the business 10, 15 plus years, go work with him. So
Mhm. Good. Well, I think there's a lot of opportunity out there. If I was to invest anywhere out of state in the United States right now, I'd be looking in your market, that region, not necessarily just your town, but that region,
sure.
just because I believe the job growth, the industry is going there. And I do think there's going to be reshoring between the scares with COVID, supply chain running out, and with the tariff negotiations to we really grasp how vulnerable we are to our supply chains. No matter what happens, we're going to get manufacturing reshored. Not all of it, but
Yeah.
enough of it to make a dent.
Yeah, I agree. And the ones that don't come to the US, I think, are going to go to Canada and Mexico, because I think if Trump can help create a better trade alliance there, so then you're going to have, you know, more jobs that pop up in the US because stuff is in Mexico and now they need a place to transport and park it in the US. So stuff
Yeah.
is going to pop up. It's just going to take time.
Yeah. So for my investment strategy, I'm going to just start watching job growth, manufacturing growth, that kind of stuff. Follow where the growth is going to happen, and then that's where the housing demand's needed.
Mhm.
Um, it just
Yeah.
location, location, location.
Yeah, that's basically my exact strategy as well. It's how can I find uh, homes and properties that are at a significant dollar amount or percentage below the median price point nationally, that also are in good areas with great growth potential and jobs coming in. And I think those two things are going to help me find properties that are cheaper, that have a better uh, possibility or percentage to increase closer to the median price point, as opposed to buying like a $500,000 house. I don't know that that's going to double, but can I buy $120,000 house that doubles to 240? Probably. So I don't know. I could be wrong, but that's just been my strategy for last couple of years at least.
Well, you're right. I mean, it's return on equity, return on your capital. Um, you got a $500,000 house and you're renting it for 3,000, that's kind of a lower return.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, it's like how many $100,000, $150,000 properties can I pick up that are all going to rent for more than, you know, 1,500 bucks, if it's, 150,
Yeah,
and I'm cash flowing and I have a better potential for that to go closer to, medium price point.
definitely. All right. Well, good
Well,
conversation. I got to run here. We're hitting the 1 o'clock hour. I've
yeah,
got more errands to run today. Our
Craig,
business never ends.
absolutely appreciate your time, and good to catch up and talk this week as always.
Yeah, how'd last week go? I missed that.
It was good. It was real good. Real good.